Ambassador Velkith of the Sorani Collective had performed first contact ceremonies 47 times in her long career. And each one had followed the same familiar pattern. The new species would arrive in a small ship. Nervous and hopeful, their technology primitive compared to the great civilizations of the Galactic Concord. And Velkith would greet them with warm words and promises of guidance, welcoming them into the fold of interstellar society like a parent welcoming a lost child home. She expected nothing different when the deep space sensor arrays detected an unknown vessel approaching. From the unexplored region, the Concorde simply called the Dark Arm. The initial reading suggested a mid-sized craft, perhaps an exploration vessel or a colony ship that had wandered too far from its home system. And Velkith prepared her usual speech about peace and cooperation and the wonderful benefits of joining the Concorde's 12-member species. She stood on the observation deck of her diplomatic cruiser, the gentle dawn, watching the empty space where the unknown ship would soon appear. And she felt the comfortable confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Then the ship arrived, and everything Velkith thought she knew about the universe shattered. Like glass, the sensor arrays did not simply detect the vessel, they screamed. Every warning system activating at once, emergency protocols cascading through her ship and every station in the sector. Alarms blaring in frequencies she had never heard. Outside of ancient war simulations, Velkith's 4 hearts stopped beating for 3 full seconds as the image resolved on her display. This was not a small exploration craft. And this was not a timid species coming to ask for help. The ship that emerged from faster-than-light travel was a mountain of black metal, sharp angles and brutal lines that spoke of nothing but war, bristling with weapons platforms that made the Concorde's mightiest dreadnoughts look like children's toys. Velkith's tactical officer, a young Sorani named Kethvil, spoke in a voice that trembled with disbelief as he reported that the vessel measured 42 kilometers from bow to stern and carried enough armament to challenge an entire Concorde battle fleet, 42 kilometers of warship. Arriving alone at the heart of civilized space, the General Dawn's computer attempted to classify the weapon systems visible on the massive hull and failed repeatedly, encountering designs and configurations that matched nothing in its database. Technologies that seemed both primitive and terrifyingly advanced in ways the system could not reconcile. Velkith watched as smaller ships launched from bays along the giant vessel's flanks escort craft. She realized, each one the size of a Concorde frigate, moving into protective formations around their mothership with the precision of dancers who had performed together for years. She counted 12 of these escorts before she stopped counting, her attention drawn to the name painted on the great ship's bow in stark white letters that stood out against the dark hull. UES Perseverance. The letters meant nothing to her, but the word itself translated through her neural implant, and she found it strangely fitting for a vessel that looked like it had fought its way through hell itself, because as the initial shock faded in her eyes, adjusted to what she was seeing, Velkith began to notice the scars. The Perseverance was not pristine, not the gleaming showpiece that Concorde vessels aspired to be, but a battered warrior bearing the marks of countless battles. Sections of the hull showed different shades of metal where repairs had been made, some old and weathered by radiation, others fresh enough that she could almost imagine the welding teams still at work. Impact craters dotted the surface, some small enough to be debris strikes, others large enough to suggest weapons fire from enemies that no longer existed. This ship had seen war. Real war. The kind of war that the Galactic Concorde had not experienced. In 9,000 years of comfortable peace, Velkith's communications officer announced that they were receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel, and the ambassador took a deep breath to steady herself before giving the order to accept the signal. A face appeared on her display, And despite all her training in xenobiology, Velkith felt a chill run through her body. The creature was bipedal, with two eyes set forward in a face that spoke of predator ancestry, skin the color of dark earth, and hair cropped short against its skull in a style that suggested military discipline. It wore a uniform of deep blue with markings that presumably indicated rank, and behind it, Velkith could see other members of its species working at stations, filled with displays and controls, but it was the creature's eyes that held her attention, eyes that were tired, so deeply tired, carrying a weight of experience that seemed far too heavy for any single being to bear. The creature spoke, and her translator worked for a moment before providing the words in her own language. This is Admiral Helena Vasquez of the United Earth ship Perseverance, representing the human coalition and the people of Earth, and we come seeking peaceful contact with whatever civilizations exist in this region of space. Velkith heard the words, heard the claim of peaceful intentions, but she could not reconcile them with the warship that filled her view screen, the weapons that could reduce her diplomatic cruiser to atoms before she could even think about running. She forced herself to respond, falling back on the formal greeting she had used so many times before, welcoming the humans to Concord space and expressing her hope for friendly relations between their peoples. The human admiral listened without expression, then spoke again. We appreciate your welcome, Ambassador, and we look forward to learning about your Concord and the species within it. But I must be honest with you from the start. We did not build this ship because we wanted to, and we did not come here looking for conquest or territory. But we have learned through bitter experience that peace is something you must be strong enough to defend, and we will not apologize for the strength we carry. Velkith felt her heart racing as she processed these words. This strange combination of peaceful intent and unmistakable warning behind her. Ketfall reported that Concord Military Command was scrambling every available ship to the sector, that the High Council had declared an emergency session, that the entire civilization was holding its breath, and the human admiral simply waited, patient and tired, aboard a ship that could end them all. This was not the first contact Velkith had prepared for, not the nervous newcomers she had expected to welcome and guide. These humans had come from the darkness, carrying thunder with them, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood on the command bridge of the Perseverance and watched the alien fleet grow on her tactical display, ship after ship arriving in flashes of light as the Concord assembled its military might in response to humanity's arrival. She counted over 200 vessels now, cruisers and frigates and destroyers, arranged in defensive formations around the diplomatic station, their weapons powered and ready. Their crews no doubt terrified of the massive warship that had appeared without warning at their doorstep. Helena felt no anger at their fear, no satisfaction in their obvious panic, only a deep and bone-tired weariness that had lived in her chest for as long as she could remember. She had been 12 years old when the Scourge came to Earth. The memories never faded. No matter how many years passed or how many battles she fought, the sky turning red as the alien vessels descended through the atmosphere, the cities burning, the screams of millions dying in the first hours of an attack that no one had seen coming. Humanity had been young then, barely reaching beyond their own solar system, dreaming of the stars without understanding the nightmares that waited in the darkness between them. The Scourge had not come to conquer or to negotiate, had not come seeking resources or territory or anything that humans could understand. They came simply to destroy, to end all life on every world they found, moving from system to system like a plague made of metal and fire, leaving nothing but dead planets in their wake. Earth should have fallen in days. Just like the other worlds, the Scourge had already consumed, worlds whose names humanity would never know. Civilizations erased before humans even knew they existed. But something unexpected happened when the Scourge came for Earth. Humanity Refused to die, Helena remembered the broadcasts in those first terrible weeks. Leaders from every nation putting aside centuries of conflict to stand together. Scientists working without sleep to understand the alien technology. Soldiers fighting with weapons that seemed like toys against the scourge war machines. They lost billions in the first year alone. Entire continents reduced to ash. The population of Earth driven underground or scattered across hastily constructed colony ships, fleeing into the unknown darkness of space, and still they fought. Learning from every defeat, adapting to every new horror the scourge unleashed. Building weapons from salvaged alien technology and human determination, the war lasted 200 years too. Centuries of fighting across 1,000 star systems. Of planets won and lost and won again. Of entire generations born and raised knowing nothing but conflict. Of sacrifices so great that the human mind could barely contain them. Helena had risen through the ranks during the final decades of that war. Had commanded ships and led assaults and watched friends die in numbers that stopped meaning anything after a while. Just statistics and reports that measured the cost of survival, and in the end, humanity won not through superior technology or greater numbers. For the scourge had both of those in abundance, but through something the alien destroyers had never encountered before, a species that simply would not give up. That kept fighting long after any rational calculation suggested surrender. That turned every defeat into a lesson and every loss into fuel for revenge. The last scourge vessel had been destroyed 43 years ago. Hunted down in a forgotten corner of space and torn apart by a fleet of human warships that had spent decades perfecting the art of killing. The unkillable Helena had been there for that final battle. Had given the order that ended the threat forever. And she had felt nothing but emptiness as she watched the enemy burn. Because victory had cost them everything. Of the 9 billion humans who had lived on Earth when the scourge arrived, fewer than 200 million remained, scattered across hidden colonies and generation ships and orbital stations. A species reduced to a fraction of what it had been. Survivors carrying wounds that would take centuries to heal. The Titan-class warships were built in the aftermath. Massive vessels designed to ensure that nothing could ever threaten humanity again. Equipped with every weapon system humanity had developed during the war, and some they had taken from the scourge themselves. The Perseverance was one of 7 such ships, each one capable of fighting an entire enemy fleet alone, each one crewed by thousands of soldiers and scientists and families who called these metal mountains home. And now Helena had brought her ship to this peaceful corner of the galaxy. Seeking not conquest but answers, she turned to her communications officer, a young woman named Sarah Chun, whose grandmother had died defending the colony on New Shanghai, and asked for a status update on the alien response to their arrival. Sarah reported that the Concorde had sent multiple diplomatic messages, requesting information about human intentions, military capabilities, and origin, while simultaneously positioning their fleet for maximum defensive coverage. Helena nodded, unsurprised by the combination of diplomacy and preparation. It was exactly what she would have done in their position. He gave the order to transmit humanity's response, a carefully prepared package of information that included a summary of human history, an explanation of the Scourge War, and a clear statement of peaceful intentions, backed by an equally clear demonstration of the consequences of hostility. The message included images and recordings from the war, evidence of what humanity had faced and what they had become in response. Proof that the Perseverance was not an aggression, but a precaution. And it included a question. The question that had driven Helena across the stars to find these alien civilizations. Have you seen the Scourge? And are there more of them waiting in the darkness? Because that was the fear that kept Helena awake during the long nights between stars. The nightmare that drove the construction of the Titan ships and the endless patrols through empty space. The Scourge they had destroyed might have been only a fragment of something larger. a scouting force or a splinter faction, and somewhere in the vast unknown reaches of the galaxy, more of them might be waiting. Humanity had survived one war of extinction, had paid a price in blood and tears that could never be fully measured. And Helena would do anything to ensure they never had to fight another. So she stood on her bridge and watched the alien fleet and waited for their answer, hoping that these strange new species might become allies instead of enemies, that humanity might finally find friends among the stars. But if friendship was not possible, if these aliens proved hostile despite her offers of peace, then Helena would do what she had always done. She would protect her people, whatever the cost. Because that was what humanity had learned during 200 years of war. Peace was precious, but survival was everything. The attack came without warning. On the third day of negotiations, Ambassador Velketh had spent those days in constant communication with Admiral Vasquez, exchanging information about their respective civilizations, learning about each other's histories and cultures, slowly building something that might eventually become trust. She had begun to believe that peaceful contact was possible, that the fearsome human warship and its tired commander truly sought friendship rather than conquest. But not everyone in the Galactic Concord shared her optimism high. Commander Zethrak of the Vortian Dominion had argued from the beginning that the humans were too dangerous to be allowed near Concord space, that their massive warship was proof of aggressive intentions regardless of what their admiral claimed. He had demanded a preemptive strike to disable the Perseverance and capture its technology before the humans could bring more of their terrible vessels. The Concord Council had rejected his demands, citing the diplomatic progress being made and the obvious risks of attacking a ship of unknown capabilities. Zethrak had decided to act on his own. Velketh learned of the attack only when her sensors detected 3 Vortian cruisers breaking formation and accelerating toward the Perseverance, their weapons charging to full power, their crews broadcasting declarations of holy purpose and racial superiority. She screamed into her communication system, ordering the Vortian vessels to stand down, begging Zethrak to stop this madness before it was too late. But her words meant nothing to warriors who had already decided to die for their cause. The 3 cruisers opened fire simultaneously, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts and kinetic projectiles and guided missiles that would have overwhelmed any Concord vessel. Enough firepower to crack a small moon. Velketh watched in horror, expecting to see the Perseverance torn apart by the assault, expecting the humans to die in fire and radiation while the galaxy rushed toward a war it could not win. What happened instead would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. The human warship moved, not slowly, not with the ponderous grace of large vessels, but with a speed that seemed impossible for something so massive, shifting its position in a blur of motion that left afterimages on her sensors. And as it moved, it fought point defense systems that Velketh had assumed were decorative came alive. Hundreds of small weapons tracking and destroying incoming projectiles with mechanical precision, filling the space around the Perseverance with a web of defensive fire that nothing could penetrate. The missiles vanished in puffs of flame before they could close to detonation range. The plasma bolts were intercepted by countershots that met them in flight. The kinetic projectiles were simply vaporized by weapons that Velketh could not even identify. The entire Vortian barrage was neutralized in less than 3 seconds. And the Perseverance had not even been scratched. Then the human ship returned fire. 3 shots, 1 for each attacking cruiser. Beams of energy so bright that Velketh's display automatically dimmed to protect their eyes, each beam striking its target with perfect accuracy. The Vortian cruisers did not explode, did not shatter into debris, did not die in the dramatic fashion of vessels destroyed in combat. Instead, they simply stopped. Their weapons went dark. Their engines fell silent. Their power systems failed completely, leaving 3 drifting hulks, populated by crews who were suddenly very aware of how badly they had miscalculated. The entire engagement lasted 11 seconds from first shot to final silence. Velketh sat in her command chair and tried to understand what she had just witnessed, tried to process the implications of a ship that could disable 3 military cruisers with contemptuous ease while simultaneously defending against their combined assault. Her tactical officer reported that the Vortian vessels showed no casualties, that the human weapons had somehow disabled every system on each ship without killing a single member of their crews. Precision like that was not just impressive. It was terrifying in its implications. A voice came through her communication system, and Velketh recognized the tired tones of Admiral Vasquez. The human commander did not sound angry, did not gloat over her victory, did not make threats or demands, but spoke with the weary patience of someone who had done this many times before. Ambassador, please inform your Concord that we did not come here to fight you, that we take no pleasure in demonstrating our capabilities, but we will defend ourselves against any attack, and we would prefer not to have to do so again. Velketh found her voice and assured the Admiral that the attack had been unauthorized, that the Vortian commander would face consequences for his actions, that the Concord remained committed to peaceful dialogue. Admiral Vasquez accepted these assurances but continued speaking. And what she said next changed everything. We came to this region of space because we are tired of fighting. Ambassador, more tired than you can possibly imagine. Because we have spent 2 centuries at war with an enemy that wanted nothing but our extinction. The Admiral paused. And when she spoke again, there was something in her voice that sounded almost like hope. The species we fought, the ones we called the Scourge, they destroyed everything they touched, wiped out entire civilizations, left nothing but dead worlds and silence wherever they went. And we stopped them, Ambassador. We destroyed every last ship they had, every base, every colony, until nothing remained of them but memories and ashes. Velketh felt cold spread through her body as she recognized the description. As ancient records and half-believed legends suddenly became terrifyingly real, the Scourge were known to the Concord, known as a myth, a story told to frighten children, a horror from the deep past that had supposedly been responsible for the extinction of countless species before the Concord even existed. No one believed they were real. Not anymore, not after thousands of years without any evidence of their existence. But the humans had found them, had fought them, had destroyed them at a cost that Velketh was only beginning to understand. Admiral Vasquez asked her question again. The question that had brought her across the stars. We need to know if there are more of them. Ambassador, if the Scourge we destroyed were all of them or just a fraction of something larger. Because if there are more, then we need to find them before they find anyone else. Velketh stared at the massive warship on her display, at the weapon of extinction that had just proved itself, capable of defeating her civilization's best efforts with barely any effort. And she finally understood why the humans had built it, not for conquest, not for aggression, not for empire, but because they had looked into the face of absolute destruction and decided that they would never be helpless. Again, she opened a channel to the Concord Council and began to explain what she had learned, knowing that her report would change everything, that the comfortable assumptions of 9,000 years were about to be swept away. The Scourge had been real, and humanity had destroyed them, and now the destroyers had come seeking friends, carrying scars that told the story of a war the Concord could not have survived. The galaxy had suddenly become a much larger and more dangerous place than anyone had imagined. Ambassador Velketh had never expected to set foot inside the human warship. But Admiral Vasquez had extended an invitation that the Concord Council could not refuse. The diplomatic shuttle approached the Perseverance slowly, giving Velkith time to study the massive hull up close, to see the scars and repairs in detail, to read the history of violence written in metal and memory. She counted 17 major hull breaches that had been patched, areas where the armor had been torn open and then rebuilt, wounds that would have killed any Concord vessel many times over. And yet the ship flew on, carrying its crew through the void, refusing to surrender to the damage it had endured. The landing bay swallowed her shuttle like a creature consuming prey, and Velkith emerged into a space larger than most Concord space stations, filled with smaller craft and equipment and the constant motion of humans going about their duties. Admiral Vasquez waited for her at the base of the ramp, accompanied by a small escort of soldiers whose eyes never stopped scanning for threats, whose bodies carried the tension of warriors who have forgotten how to relax. The Admiral welcomed Velkith aboard and offered to show her the ship, and the ambassador accepted, knowing that what she saw here would shape the future relationship between their peoples. What she discovered over the following hours changed everything she thought she knew about humanity. The Perseverance was not just a weapon of war, not simply a machine designed to destroy enemies and survive battles, but something far more complex and far more human. They walked through corridors lined with names, thousands upon thousands of names etched into the walls in small, precise letters. And Vasquez explained that these were the fallen, the crew members who had died defending the ship over its 40 years of service. Each name represented a story, a life, a sacrifice made so that others might survive. And the humans remembered every single one. Of Vikth had expected to find a cold military vessel, all function and no feeling. But instead, she found a community. They passed through residential sections where families lived in small but comfortable quarters, where children played in corridors under the watchful eyes of parents and caretakers, where the sounds of laughter and music drifted through recycled air. She saw schools where young humans learned history and science and art, classrooms decorated with drawings that showed stars and planets and dreams of peaceful futures. She visited gardens where plants from Earth grew under artificial sunlight, carefully tended by specialists who treated each leaf and flower as a precious treasure, living memories of a homeworld that most of the younger generation had never seen. Admiral explained that the Titan ships were more than warships. They were arcs, carrying the remnants of human civilization through the dangerous void, protecting not just lives but cultures, histories, entire ways of being that had nearly been lost forever. A museum occupied one entire deck, filled with artifacts and recordings from before the war, evidence of the vibrant civilization humanity had once possessed, the art and music and literature they had created before the scourge came and forced them to become warriors. Vel stood before a painting of a blue and green world, a planet of oceans and forests and cities gleaming in sunlight, and Vasquez told her that this was Earth, not as it existed now, but as it had been before the invasion, before the fires, before the long war that had transformed everything. The planet still existed. The Admiral said, but it was scarred now, healing slowly from the devastation of the first scourge attack. Its population still a fraction of what it had once been, its people still working to rebuild what had been destroyed. They walked on, and Velkith found herself in a memorial hall, a vast space filled with holographic images of worlds and faces and moments frozen in time. These were the lost, Vasquez explained, the colonies that had fallen during the war, the billions who had died before humanity learned how to fight back. The price that had been paid for survival. Velth counted over 100 worlds represented in that hall, each one a tragedy beyond comprehension, each one a wound that humanity still carried. She turned to the Admiral and asked the question that had been forming in her mind since she came aboard. How do you bear it? All of this loss, all of this pain. How do you continue when so much has been taken from you? Admiral Vasquez was silent for a long moment, her eyes distant, her face showing the weight of years and memories that would crush most beings. Then she spoke, and her voice was soft but steady. We continue because we have to. Ambassador, because giving up would mean that everyone who died, everyone who sacrificed, everyone who fought and suffered and held on through the darkest moments, all of that would have been for nothing. She gestured at the memorial around them. At the faces and worlds preserved in light, we remember them. We honor them. We carry them with us wherever we go. And we make sure that their deaths meant something by building a future worth having. Velketh felt tears forming in her eyes. An emotional response she had not expected. A reaction to the sheer weight of human suffering and human determination that surrounded Hirsch. She asked another question, one that had been troubling her since the beginning. Why do you seek friends now? After all these years alone, after proving that you can survive without anyone else? The Admiral smiled, and for the first time since they had met, she looked not tired, but almost hopeful. Because survival is not enough, Ambassador. Because we did not fight for 200 years just to exist in isolation. Because our children deserve more than endless vigilance and empty space. She looked at Velketh with eyes that held both pain and possibility. We built these ships to protect ourselves. Yes, but we also built them hoping that someday we would find others. That we would discover civilizations that might become allies and friends. That the universe might hold more than just enemies and silence. Velketh understood then what she was truly seeing. Not just a warship and its crew, but a people reaching out after centuries of darkness. Hoping desperately that someone would reach back, she took the Admiral's hand. A gesture of connection that transcended species and history. And made a promise, I will speak to the Concord. Admiral, I will tell them what I have seen here. And I will argue for friendship between our peoples. The Admiral's grip was firm and warm. And her smile grew just a little wider. That is all we can ask. Ambassador, the chance to prove that we are more than just warriors. That we have something to offer besides weapons and scars. They stood together in the memorial hall, surrounded by the ghosts of the fallen, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future seemed to hold something other than war. The Galactic Concord Council Chamber had not seen such division in over 3,000 years. Representatives from all 12 member species filled the circular hall, their voices rising in argument and accusation, their gestures sharp with fear and anger and uncertainty. The question before them was simple, but its implications were vast. What should the Concord do about humanity? Some demanded immediate action against the threat, arguing that any species capable of building the Perseverance was too dangerous to allow near civilized space, that the humans should be driven away before they could bring more of their terrible warships. Others called for caution and patience, pointing out that the humans had shown remarkable restraint during the Vortian attack, that they had disabled rather than destroyed, that their admiral spoke of peace, even while commanding weapons of unimaginable power. High Commander Zethrak of the Vortian Dominion sat in chains, awaiting judgment for his unauthorized attack, his face still showing shock at how easily his cruisers had been neutralized. Ambassador Velketh stood at the center of the chamber, having requested permission to address the full council, to share what she had learned during her time aboard the Perseverance. The council fell silent as she began to speak. She told them about the memorial hall, about the 100 lost worlds and the billions of dead, about a species that had paid a price for survival that the Concord could not imagine. She described the children playing in corridors, the families living their lives in the shadow of war, the gardens where humans grew flowers from a wounded homeworld. She spoke of Admiral Vasquez, of the weariness in her eyes and the hope in her voice, of a warrior who wanted nothing more than to stop fighting. And she told him about the scourge. The chamber erupted in disbelief and denial. Voices shouting that the scourge were myths, legends, stories invented to explain ancient extinctions. Not real threats that still lurked in the darkness, but Velkith had brought evidence. Recordings and data provided by the humans. Proof of the war they had fought and the enemy they had destroyed. She showed them images of scourge vessels. Massive constructions of dark metal and organic components. Ships designed for nothing but destruction. She played recordings of battles. Human ships swarming against enemies that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Fighting with desperate courage against creatures that knew no mercy. She shared the casualty reports, the lists of lost worlds, the documentation of 2 centuries of unending warfare that the humans had somehow survived. The chamber fell silent again, not from order, but from shock, as the reality of what humanity had faced and defeated became impossible to deny. A young diplomat from the Sarani collective rose to speak. A representative named Kethla, who had barely reached adulthood by her species standards. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. The humans did not come to us with demands or threats. They did not attack our ships or claim our territory. They came asking questions, seeking friends, hoping that they might finally find allies after centuries of fighting alone. She looked around the chamber at the gathered representatives, at the fear and suspicion in their eyes. They have every reason to hate the universe, every justification for conquest and revenge after everything that was taken from them. But instead, they reach out with open hands and tired hearts. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. If we turn them away, if we reject them out of fear and send them back into the darkness, what does that say about us? What does it say about the Concord that we claim to represent? The young diplomat met the eyes of the senior council members, challenging them despite her youth. We have lived in peace for 9,000 years. Protected by distance and luck, never facing a threat that could truly destroy us. Never tested the way humanity has been tested. She gestured toward the images still displayed in the chamber. The evidence of human suffering and human determination. They faced extinction and survived. They fought a war we could not have won. They destroyed an enemy that would have consumed us all eventually. And they did it without any help, without any allies, without even knowing that we existed. Kethla's voice dropped almost to a whisper. But every being in the chamber heard her words. They earned their strength through sacrifice, earned their weapons through blood and tears. And now they come to us not as conquerors, but as survivors hoping for friendship. She stood tall, young and small among the ancient powers of the galaxy. We should give them that friendship. Not because we fear them, not because we need their weapons, but because it is right, because they deserve it, because the universe should reward courage and sacrifice with something other than loneliness. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after she finished speaking. Then, slowly, representatives began to signal their agreement. First one, then another. Then a growing wave of consent that swept through the chamber. The vote was called, and by an overwhelming margin, the Galactic Concord extended an invitation to humanity, not full membership. Not yet, but the beginning of formal relations. A chance for dialogue and trust to develop between their peoples. Ambassador Velkith transmitted the decision to the Perseverance. And within minutes, Admiral Vasquez appeared on the chamber's main display. The human admiral looked tired, as she always did, but something had changed in her expression. Something that might have been relief or hope, or simply the lightening of a burden carried too long. She thanked the council for their decision, promised that humanity would honor the trust being placed in them, and expressed her hope that this was the beginning of something lasting. Then she gave an order to her crew, an order that made every sensor in the system register the change. The Perseverance was powering down its weapons for the first time in 40 years. Since the ship had been launched during the final desperate campaigns against the Scourge, The great warship stood down from combat readiness. It was a gesture of trust, a statement of intent, a declaration that humanity believed, at least for this moment, that they were among friends in the observation deck of the Perseverance. A young girl named Maya pressed her hand against the viewport and watched alien ships drift past in formations that were protective rather than threatening. She was 8 years old, born on the ship, raised in corridors of metal and memories. And she had never known a universe that was not at war. Her grandmother had died fighting the Scourge. Her parents served on the weapons crews that had just powered down their stations. And every story she had ever heard was about survival and sacrifice and loss. But now she was watching something new. Something her grandmother had never seen. Something her parents had only dreamed about. She was watching Peace Admiral Vasquez found her there an hour later, still staring out at the alien vessels. And the old warrior stood beside the young child in silence. Maya asked if the aliens were really going to be friends. If the fighting was really over, if things were going to be different now. The Admiral knelt down to look the girl in the eyes. And her voice was gentle in a way that would have surprised anyone who only knew her as a commander of weapons. I do not know for certain, Maya, because friendship takes time and trust takes effort. And there will be problems and disagreements and challenges we cannot predict. She smiled. And the smile reached her eyes in a way it had not for many years. But for the first time since before you were born, since before your parents were born, we have a chance. A real chance at something other than war. She placed her hand on Maya's shoulder. Your generation might be the first to grow up without enemies. The first to know what peace really means. And that is worth more than all the victories we have ever won. Maya looked back out at the stars, at the alien ships and the strange new future they represented. Somewhere in the void, the other Titan ships received their orders. Messages from the Perseverance, telling them that contact had been made, that friendship was possible, that the long watch might finally be coming to an end, and across 100 hidden colonies, across generation ships and orbital stations and the wounded surface of Earth itself. Humanity heard the news and dared to hope. They had come to the stars prepared for the worst, armed with weapons of extinction, carrying the scars of a war that had nearly ended everything. But they had found something better. They had found the chance to stop being survivors and start being something more. And in the observation deck of the greatest warship humanity had ever built, a little girl watched the future unfold and smiled.